Right. Okay. Welcome back to another Just 15 Minutes. And I keep getting asked a heck of a lot, actually. Actually, I don't. Nobody speaks to me. I live a very lonely little life in my little room here. But anyway, if they did, they were saying, would this actually be within 15 minutes? And I do hope so. I'll try my best. Anyway, so what are we looking at? Can AI actually build um, okay, a fairly trivial but not overly trivial application for you. Okay, so I'm using .NET Visual Studio and my Copilot here, GitHub Copilot to be sure. By the way, do you think we're being watched? You know, the as I move my mouse, we're being watched. Um anyway, enough of that conspiracy theory. Of course, we're being monitored. Anyway, but GitHub Copilot. Now you do have to pay for it. Okay, it's $10 US, I believe. Um, Now, depending on what that means to you, that is either not a lot of money or it's enough to put you off. And if that is the case, one thing I did a bit more of a deep dive into a few weeks ago, I think I did a podcast on this, is Codium. Okay, Codium, I think is um, a little bit underrated, or maybe it's just a little bit drowned out in all of these AI tools that are coming around. But the good thing with Codium is that, first of all, it's zero dollars free forever. And it really does have actually quite a generous sort of offering for the zero. Okay. But interestingly, and I think they show on where you can actually download. Where's the down? I'll get Codium. There we go. Okay, yeah. So the idea is, sorry, I'm a professional outfit. Um, the idea is where GitHub Copilot works with Visual Studio Code and Visual Studio, and obviously in GitHub itself, Codium works with Visual Studio, just like I'm about to show you. So it's an extension that loads in and it sits inside Visual Studio, just like GitHub Copilot, which you're going to see very shortly. But it also works in a similar way with Visual Studio Code, um, the JetBrains tools, basically, and all of these other ones, in fact, including really in the browser as well. So you've got Sublime, which I know a lot of people do love. I've just not been bothered to learn a lot of the Sublime shortcuts, and I should. But it's got a lot of the other stuff, like, again, all the, the IntelliJ, what was I going to say, the JetBrains tools, Android Studio, Xcode, and all sorts of things. But the key thing is, it is also, like I say, it's got that lovely free, uh, free forever monthly one. Now, it's got a $10 one, but the interesting thing, and I know that GitHub Copilot has just done this, is that you have a choice of certain models. Like you can have unlimited, like for the $10, the same amount that I'm paying for GitHub Copilot, you've got access to GPT-4o, but also Claude Sonnet, which is actually really quite good. Actually, Claude Sonnet. I need to dig a little bit deeper into that specifically, but I know that GitHub Copilot are just about ready to release. You'll see a little bit anyway as I show you, where you can actually select that, and I think Claude Sonnet is 3.5, I believe, is one of the options that you can use, one of the models. And there's some pluses, minuses, and people have said, Claude and even Gemini can be better at certain things in the code, but we'll have a look anyway. But the point being is that you're not excluded if you want to try what I'm about to show you. You could try that with Codium, and I think it will do a pretty reasonable job even in the free version. So what I'm going to be using is GitHub Copilot because that's what I've got used to. But as I say, like everything, there's always other options. So we're going to dig into that. And the first thing I'm going to show you is some of the setup. So we'll dig into that in a second or two. Okay, so we'll jump in, and before I get into the actual code, I should explain what I'm actually trying to build. And the idea is I'm using the AI, in my case, GitHub Copilot, but again, try Encodium or something similar to that, to actually build a stored procedure generator. Now, I know that's a little bit niche, and maybe people don't use stored procedures in databases, although I've got a feeling a lot of people do. So the idea is, in my job anyway, we do use stored procedures, and there are some really cool tools. A bit of a shout out to SSMS Toolpack, which is an add-in to the Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio, and it does a lot of other things. But one of the things that I bought it for was, to generate store procedures to do insert updates and all those sorts of things. So imagine when you've got a database table with more than just a handful of fields, it's just laborious going through generating, a store procedure every time. So what I wanted to do, and no disrespect to SSMS Toolpack, because it does a lot of other good things, by the way. A little bit of a plug there, no affiliation. It's very cheap as well. You should look it up. I'll put the link in the comments below. It's a really useful tool. But anyway, I wanted to use, as a bit of an experiment, use AI to actually generate a store procedure creator. Okay, so obviously it has to connect to a database, a server, and then allow you to select from a database, and from that database select a table. But I wanted to take it a little bit further. Okay. Of course, I need an insert store procedure. I need an update store procedure, but also something, and it's nothing special. It's just that it's sometimes referred to as an upsert. Basically, if you provide a key on a table, it will either say, I can't see that key, I'm going to do an insert. But if it finds that key, it's going to do an update. Okay. And to take it one further step is, when it does any of the updates, I want it to be clever enough to say, only update the fields that I supply in the store procedure parameters. So in other words, if I've got 100 fields and I have got an update statement or an upsert store procedure, um, if I've only got like 2 or 3 fields that I want to update, I don't want to provide all the values for everything else. It has to be clever enough to work that out. Okay. And we can do that. We can do that in code, where you check if the incoming parameter to the store procedure is null, then you keep whatever the existing field value is. Okay. But if you do pass a store procedure value, then of course it'll update it. So that was the premise of building this with the AI Copilot, GitHub Copilot for me. Okay. Anyway, to get started, what I've got is I've got Docker. I've got Docker Desktop. I'm not going to go into the detail of Docker Desktop. I can, if you want to let me know in the comments, we can do it from complete startup, to how to define all this. But the key bit is Docker Desktop is available for all the main OSs, Mac, Linux, of course, Windows in my case. And also the fact that there's lots of images. So instead of loading stuff in on your laptop or PC, you can have things running in containers and shut them down when you're not using them. And there's loads of different Docker images for everything under the sun, including lots of the databases like MySQL, Postgres, SQL, and whatnot. So the idea is I'm using an image from Microsoft, which happens to be SQL, Microsoft SQL 2022, but the Linux version. Okay, uh, unless you didn't know that, but it is available on a Linux platform. Okay, so the idea is my container is running currently. If I close it, okay, now a lot of people will say, well, yeah, once you close that, all your databases disappear. Well, they don't, because there is something called volumes, Docker volumes. Okay, so I've got a volume that maps outside the container. Okay, so if I click on this one, which is the container I'm using rather, and you can see container in use. That's the container. there's my stored data. Now this is outside the container. I can close down that container, and it's not using any resources, unlike if you installed SQL locally, or Postgres locally, or MySQL locally. You have a choice, and also you've got a choice of all of these different flavors. So if I decide I need something like Microsoft SQL 2019, I can get the image for that, install it in Docker, and I can have multiple versions of the same database. But anyway, the point being is that the Docker desktop, um, the volume is outside of the container. So when I'm not using it, closed down, but I've still got the data. And again, at some stage, if you want me to go through how to get started with Docker Desktop, there's loads of resources out there, but I'm happy to do that because it'll show how you can use the Windows File Explorer to actually see where this data is, back it up, add more databases, update things, all of those manner of things. But again, I'm not going to go too far into it, but just to explain, that's what I'm using. Also using Azure Data Studio, which is a little bit incorrectly named in my book. It doesn't have to work with Azure. It can work with local databases as well. In fact, I'm using that said Linux SQL 2022 Docker container. And I'm using one of the demo databases, AdventureWorks 2022. Okay, and the interesting thing with Azure Data Studio is it looks very similar to VS Code, Visual Studio Code, because it's built on the same thing. Okay, and it's got a lot of tricks up its sleeve. You can have lots of different extensions and profiles, so that if you're working with Microsoft SQL, um, you can only, it can load just the extensions and key maps and things that you use for that environment. If you then move to Postgres SQL, it can load all the things that you need for that. So there's some really nifty things. So that's what I'm using, just purely to show you the databases that are in that Docker container, and what we're actually going to use when we generate the code using AI, which we'll get into in the next section. Righty, let's move into the code side of things. So I'm using, as I've mentioned, I'm using Visual Studio, the full version. Okay, and the idea is, again, I've lost my. Just bear with me, 1 second. Sorry about that. I do love Snagit for recording video, but for some reason, their little window where you have all the controls disappears. Not very professional video. But anyway, never mind. Yeah, so, okay. I am now in Visual Studio, which is the latest version, I think 2022 of Visual Studio. And just to add, it is the community version. So it's the free version of Visual Studio as well. You can do the same as what I'm doing here in Visual Studio Code. I think actually I did a podcast on the JetBrains Rider, which is another very popular .NET development environment, IDE. And just in the last few weeks of the time of this recording anyway, JetBrains have now got a community free version, not for production, not for sort of business use, but you can have the full version of JetBrains Rider, which is really quite nice. So you could use that as well. JetBrains do have their own AI add-in as well. I think it's a little bit cheaper, but I haven't really used that in too much of what I've been playing with so far. But anyway, here we are. I'm basically in Visual Studio. I've created a C#.NET console application. Now, when I created this console application, let me just click save there. Oh, excuse me. The idea is I literally created the program.cs and deleted everything. Okay. Now, sadly, I've lost the prompt, which doesn't help. I told you it was a really professional video, this. But anyway, the prompt went something like I mentioned in the last segment, where I need to connect to a SQL server in this case, a Microsoft SQL Server, and I want to be able to see the databases and allow selection of a table and create store procedures to do an insert, an update, and more importantly, a little bit different, an upsert, like I mentioned, where if I've got a key, it'll do an update. Otherwise, it'll do an insert. Okay. And this saves a heck of a lot of time if you're working with store procedures. Okay. So essentially, it generated all of this code. Okay. Now, there were a few issues, and this is where my history over here comes in. I had a few sort of errors saying globalization invariant mode is not supported. I had no idea even what that was, but GitHub Copilot guided me through to the CS proj file, the project file, to set this parameter here to false. Now, again, all of this, what we're looking at, really still balances the fact that, yes, it's a productivity tool, but you sort of need to know what the heck it's generating. Okay. Um, and the interesting thing and the honest answer is I'm not that great a developer anymore. I don't think I ever was, but certainly I know most things that I'm used to doing, like connecting to databases and things like that. But again, you've really got to still know what it's generating. But it generated all of this code, and again, with a few little extras of me prompting, saying, "Look, there's an error here, or an error there, or whatever it might be." It generated everything. Now, at the moment, it is because you can actually talk to the workspace, so it's very specific about having answers from the code that I've got generated. Okay, so it generated pretty much everything. I've tweaked a few little things, but mostly to do with really just cosmetic changes and things like that. But does it work? Okay, well, let's just run it in debug mode. Okay, let's give this a little run. So I've got my Docker container running where Microsoft SQL Server is running. It happens to be, and I'm typing one-handed, that's why it's a bit slow, localhost. Okay, the database name is Adventure Works. I really should get a microphone stand, shouldn't I? 2022. Okay. There we go. And I can now authenticate. Now it's also added the fact that I can use Windows Auth if I've got Windows Auth to that SQL Server setup. I don't at the moment. So I'm just going to use good old SA. What could possibly go wrong? Okay, and I'm going to put a password in. Now, what it's done, I did say in the original prompt that I wanted to use something called Spectre Console, which is a NuGet package for .NET, and it gives you this lovely sort of nice, rich environment to do command line prompts and stuff like that. So everything like this, where it's got like a password and stuff, that's okay. So there we go. And look, sorry, the resolution and the color scheme could be obviously a lot better, but look, it's letting me select tables out of that database. If I scroll down, sure enough, it's got lots of different things, different tables that I can yeah, I can look for products, I don't know, addresses. I've got no idea what I want to do. Maybe I will look for, well, let's have a look down here for something a little bit. Now, the idea is I want to find a database table that's got quite a lot of fields. Okay, so, and I'm pretty sure that some of these, like vendor and things like that, do. If they don't worry, you can see where this is going. But if I click enter there, press enter, should I say, okay, there we go. Now it's going to ask me what is the key for that table. It could automatically pick this up from the database, of course. But it's allowing me, because of my scenario, I might have a store procedure that I want a certain value to be the key. Okay, so instead of business entity, I might say, in this case, I actually need the account number. Okay, and voila. Now I've just got it writing out to the to the console. I could prompt Copilot now to say, allow me another option when you're putting your details in to the start, saying, would you like to just display it to the screen, or would you like to save it as a .sql file? And it could even do each one, so you've got all your stored procedures being created. Now, this table I picked actually hasn't got a great deal of fields, but you can see it's created an insert store procedure. Okay, it's created an update store procedure, and it's created an upsert store procedure. And the reason for that is nothing more than it will say if the key that I selected exists, it will do an update. Okay, but otherwise it'll do an insert. Okay, and that for me is one thing that I really needed. Now, the only other thing that it isn't doing at the moment that I mentioned is I'm going to reprompt this to say at the moment it's going to do the updates, whether it's in the upsert or the actual update store procedure. It's going to it's basically looking at all these parameters as mandatory. What happens if I don't want them to be mandatory apart from the key? And I only want to update the table if I provide a value. So that's what I was saying, where I want to leave the existing value if I haven't passed a parameter, but update it if I have. And that's what I'm going to prompt Copilot next, but we've really run out of time. So what I'll do, I might post an update to this. And again, we can go through further sort of stuff like Docker desktop setups and how you can get SQL or Postgres or MySQL running in your local Docker environment using Docker desktop. But for now, I hope that worked. Please like and subscribe, he said in desperation. But anyway, that does help. Thank you. And we will follow this up in other videos, I'm sure. But for now, I think that will do. And take care. Have a great week.